I'm back with my second installment on my garden journal. When last I left you, I had shown you all of the papers that I had designed and some of the ephemera. And so as I started putting things together, I realized that 30 pages of art was a little much for one book. And as it turned out, once I started adding the other papers and bags and envelopes and things, I realized I could make 2 journals of 2 signatures and a third journal of 1 signature out of the same printing. So that's what I decided to do. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a few things today about how I do my covers, because there's been a lot of interest in that. So the first thing I do when I'm looking at my covers, is that I know that the height of this book is 8.5, because it's made out of 8.5 by 11 paper folded in half. And to give myself a little bit of room on each side, about 1/8 of an inch or so, I'm going to make my cover 8 3/4 tall. So the next measurement that I want is how much do I need for the spine. Well, I put everything together with the things that were the most bulky, cards, bags, envelopes, and then I just kind of lightly compressed this, measured with a ruler, and realized I needed about 3/4 of an inch. Then the next measurement that I needed was the width of the covers, the back and front covers. You will notice that when you put your pages together, they start drifting out, as you see here. And the reason for that is that paper has bulk, especially and the papers that are like envelopes and bags and those kinds of things, they're even double bulk. So things start drifting out. If this was a case-bound book, I would have allowed for that in the artwork and then taken a guillotine cutter and cut it all off square. But that's not what we're doing. We're doing a junk journal, which is much easier to deal with, and we just let this fly. So I measured the width, and I'm going to turn that towards you instead of towards me, and it came out to be about 5 3/4. So knowing that I might want to add a little something on edge detail, I went ahead and decided to make my cover 6 inches wide. So I needed material that was 6 inches plus 3/4 plus 6 inches, or 12 3/4 wide. So what I decided to do is create my covers out of Kraftex, and this is what it looks like. It's a cross between paper and fabric, and it's very pliable. And to strengthen it, I glue 2 pieces together using either PVA or collage glue. But like paper, like fabric, it expands when it gets wet and it contracts when it dries. And sometimes it does it real evenly and sometimes not so much. So yes, I want my finished book to be 8 3/4 by 12 3/4, but I had to allow a little bit of extra on the edges so that after it had expanded and contracted, I could square it back up. Well, when I did this particular cover, it was a little less than 12 3/4, but you can kind of work with that, because like I said before, I needed just slightly less than 3/4 of an inch for my spine anyway when I measured. So I can accommodate that. So how do I do that? Well, what I do is I measure in from the side 6 inches, because I definitely needed that depth, scored a line, went to the other edge, measured in 6 and scored. And then that way it gave me a spine that was thick enough to accommodate my book and still have room here. If I kind of jiggle it all together, I've got a little at the top, a little at the bottom, and I've got plenty here on the foredge of the book. So what about that single signature book? Well, for that, I decided to do a 1-piece cover that does a wraparound like this. And as you can see here, I measured and still needed my 6 inches. I needed another 6 inches plus a little bit, and I'll get to that little bit in a minute, and about 3 inches for the lap over, which I thought was just a pleasing amount. You could do any amount you like. I plan to add a button with a seam binding wraparound as my closure, and so that amount just kind of seemed to be correct for me. That little bit that you want to extend, so you measure in your 6 inches here, and then when you go to measure from this 6 inches out to here, you add a little bit, and that's because this has bulk and depth, and for this to come up and around, it'll impinge on this if it's right at it. It needs to have this little bit of breathing room to come up and come around. So at this stage, this is ready for me to put some end papers here and some decorative paper here on the flap and be ready to sew my book. For the other covers, there's a couple of things to think about. You can see here that when I cut my end papers for this book, I made sure to cut it a little bit shy of the measurement so that I had about 1/8 of an inch exposed here. And I also did not want to go over this fold. If you put more bulk into that fold, your book will not want to fold up. It will bind and it will not close up correctly. So you need to be sure and do that. So this cover has the end papers in it, and it's ready for me to do some cover art, and I've already started thinking about that and designing some things, options that I might use for my front and back cover. And what I'll do with those is I will glue them on, decoupage, add some stickles, maybe a little paint, maybe some 3D embellishments in my hardware, and then I'll be ready to sew my book. So how do I decide about how I'm going to sew my book? My go-to type of sewing is either the pamphlet stitch or the cross stitch for these kind of, I think Ephemeris Vintage Garden actually calls it crisscross, for my 1 or 2 signature books. And so for this this book, I'm going to have the single signature, and I could do a 3-hole pamphlet stitch, but I don't like that for this reason. If I go to something that's loose in here, this bag for instance, if I do a 3-hole pamphlet stitch, you usually have a hole somewhere down here, one here, and one in the middle. That means any of your smaller pieces of pages, tags, whatever, are only caught with one hole. And that allows this paper to twist and turn over time as you turn your pages or use your book. And that can lead to ripping and tearing and issues that I have found of books that I've had for quite a while. So I prefer, when I have smaller items, when all the pages are not this tall, to do a 5-hole pamphlet stitch. That way, if I put one here, one here, one here, one here, and one here, you'll see this is actually going to get pinned by 3. Some of my smaller tags, I'll be sure to position them inside the book so they get at least 2 holes through them. And that way, everything is secure and it's not going to wiggle around on me. So that is where I am at this point. I'm going to finish up my covers, put my end pages in, and do some sewing, and I will be back with you for a flip through and some other minor tutorial items on the 3rd and final video of this group. Thank you very much for watching.